Even today, the idea of secession can win popular support if presented properly. For example, last year, Michigan families successfully seceded from the town in which they had been living. As Adam Young described it, on Tuesday, December 17, 2002, Aranac Township in Omer City, Michigan, held a joint referendum brought about by the actions of one woman, Cheryl Perry. The Perrys simply no longer wished to be looted by the Omer municipal government for sewer services they were not receiving, even if it was only for $41 a year. After the polls closed, Cheryl Perry got the outcome she wanted. Out of a total vote tally of 140, with 82 votes yes and 58 miserable voters voting no, the Perrys had successfully seceded from Omer and Omer's taxman. Although there were a fair number of no votes, a significant majority of voters recognized the Perrys' right to live under the government of their own choice. And in a sense, this shouldn't be too surprising, since the national government that those people live under also came about through an act of secession. The idea of a right to secession is, I believe, a concrete proposal that can alleviate the discouragement that many would-be libertarians feel at the prospects for a free society. There are many people today who do value liberty but find the idea impractical. They might even think a libertarian world would work, but believe we have no hope of getting there. It's not on the menu, they say. Statist attitudes are everywhere amongst the public. The man in the street doesn't have libertarian views. We couldn't achieve this for centuries. Fortunately for us, there were pioneers who provided an example of how to eliminate a pervasive but unjust institution in only a few generations. They were the abolitionists, and the institution was slavery. As Stephen Carson wrote, several hundred years ago, the notion that the slave trade could be ended and then chattel slavery itself abolished certainly seemed utopian. But British evangelical Christians began to make the moral case against it, and within a century or two, slavery was abolished throughout the wider European world. The abolitionists were faced with a choice. They could have tried to convince a majority of people of the correctness of a particular religious view, part of which was that slavery is wrong. But to make the whole world Congregationalist, Methodist, or Baptist, it might have taken thousands of years. In the meantime, if they cooperated with others who shared their opinion of slavery, they could achieve great good in the nearer future, the end of human bondage. Achieving their short-term goal did not mean compromising fundamental beliefs. Someone could still argue that Methodism was the true path while cooperating with a Quaker to abolish slavery. We often adopt that approach in our day-to-day lives. For example, Bob Murphy is a good friend of mine. Nevertheless, we sometimes have fierce disputes over theoretical issues. Well, so what? We're still friends, and we're still able to collaborate in areas where we agree. If we were, for instance, basketball players, I would say that while at times we have a different idea of what play to run, we're still on the same team. And differences of opinion like that shouldn't distract us from the basic goal of beating the other fellows. Now, some people, my embrace of diverse forms of libertarianism here might lead some people to accuse me of some form of relativism. The idea is slanderous. I don't for a minute contend that all philosophies are created equal, or that there is no best worldview. There is. It's mine. But I realize that not all of you immediately are prepared to agree with me on everything. You'll come around, but it could take time. So in the meantime, what I suggest is to looking for allies to find a basis where we can agree and move forward on those bases. Disputing the merits of various ethical systems, bases for liberty and so forth is not pointless. That's not my contention in the least. But I don't think that resolving that debate is how we'll advance on our road. In order to progress toward liberty, we must convince the average Joe that liberty is important to him. Now, I've met the average Joe, and believe me, he has little interest in whether human rights are grounded on natural law, utilitarian calculus, cultural traditions, or something else altogether. What will influence the average person, in my belief, is straightforward examples that illuminate the real nature of various state activities. we're not trying to get him to overthrow his entire worldview and adopt ours. What I think we should try to do is alert him to the fact that within his existing worldview, that various state activities are already wrong, if only he would shake out the inconsistencies. One way to do this is to look at language. Here I think Guido Holtzman has done us a great service by pointing out the state-generated fog swirling through our language. Theft is called asset forfeiture. The murder of Randy Weaver's wife is called law enforcement. Budget increases are called cuts in spending. The mist is necessary to prevent everyone, including those generating the mist, from seeing what is really occurring. Our job, as I see it, is to burn off that fog. Holtzman shows that this fog obscures the immoral nature of the domineering state. It creates the illusion that the state stands apart from ordinary values and judgments. The state somehow represents the mystical will of the people, or our voluntary collective choices. If we can make it clear that we should not tolerate behavior from our government that we would not tolerate from our friend, we'll have made a great step forward. For example, I was talking with a friend of mine some time ago. He was very interested in politics, but less so in political theory. And he was querying me about libertarianism. And as he's an avid camper, I said, well, imagine this. You, Dick, Mark, and I go camping. And we're going to camp up at the top of the mountain. And on the way up, Dick and I decide that, well, it would be nice to build a little lean-to in case the weather is bad. On the way back down, we'll have a little shelter. And we tell Mark, and he says, oh, well, no thanks. I'm really in the mood to keep walking. I'm going to head on up the mountain. And you guys go ahead, and I'll meet you up there. So, sorry, Mark, you can't do that. What do you mean I can't do that? Well, if you do that, we'll have to kill you. What? So, well, it's not, Mark, it's not that we want to kill you or anything. I mean, at first, if you resist, we'll just rough you up a little bit. But, if you keep resisting, we voted. We're the majority, and you're resisting the will of the people. So, you better get down and get busy. Well, I finished my tale and said, now, how is that different than the social democratic welfare state? And he thought for a moment, and he said, it really isn't different, is it? And he told me later that at that moment he became convinced of the essential soundness of libertarian theory. My point is that most people would already judge the action of the three campers to be wrong. And the ones who wouldn't, we're not going to convince with any sort of argument, I don't think. The people who do recognize it is wrong already, though, we don't need to change their entire worldview. We just have to show them that it's this fog that keeps them from recognizing that when the state acts like this, it's not any different than when the three campers acted like that. Another reason I think a right to secession is that I'm recommending that as our road toward liberty, is that it doesn't require widespread agreement on what specific laws any particular civil association ought to have. On the contrary, the recognition of a right to secession peacefully accommodates the widest possible divergence of opinion about what laws are just by enabling a multitude of legal systems to coexist without intrinsic conflict between them. For one thing, this helps alleviate the conflict that has divided libertarianism for quite some time between anarcho-capitalists who believe that no state can be just and minarchists who hold that society needs a minimal state to enforce basic laws and provide defense. If each group recognizes the right of the other to attempt to realize the form of social organization it favors, then there is no longer any inherent conflict between them. Nor does the acceptance of a right to secession commit one to any particular form of organization for defense and law enforcement. Civil associations might employ traditional police and defense forces, hire private defense agencies, as proposed by Rothbard and David Friedman, form mutual defense agencies, as recommended by Paul Birch, or establish the sort of insurance system proposed by Hans Hoppe and Bob Murphy, or employ some as yet undreamed of form of defense and law enforcement. No doubt many people will find some of the laws that other people choose to live under bizarre or unjust. However, as long as membership in a civil association is voluntary, and no group tries to impose its vision of just law on any other, I see no reason why such groups should not live in peace with each other. I'll like to examine an example that's dear to the heart of many people here, and is an area of fierce dispute among libertarians: fractional reserve banking. Many libertarians view it with extreme distaste. I believe they have a perfect right to form civil associations that do not permit the practice. However, one person who was against fractional reserve banking wrote to me and seemed to suggest that it had to be stamped out everywhere by force. And this was very odd to me. And I'd like to look at the implication of such a view. Now let's imagine two civil associations, Rothbardville and Freedmantown, existing in neighboring villages. Of course, in the world I'm describing, the groups might even be geographically intermingled, but that's unimportant for this scenario. Fractional reserve banking is banned in Rothbardville, but practiced enthusiastically in Freedmantown. To be consistent, my correspondent would have to endorse an invasion of Freedmantown by Rothbardville in order to force the Freedmanites to give up fractional reserve banking. However, as long as the Freedmanites were not surreptitiously attempting to pass fractional reserve notes to the Rothbardians, it clearly would be an act of aggression, in my mind, on the part of the Rothbardians to attack them. Should any individual Freedmanite complain to a Rothbardian that he believes his rights are being violated because his deposits are not being held entirely in bank vaults, what I believe the correct response is from a Rothbardian is, you're absolutely right. You've come to your senses now. Secede from Freedmantown and join Rothbardville. I don't see any reason the two groups could not live in peace and trade with each other as long as the Freedmanites use gold or paper money fully backed by gold for payment to the Rothbardians. The Rothbardians might find the Freedmanites' indulgence in fractional reserve banking to be foolish in the extreme, just as anarcho-socialists might find Rothbardians or Freedmanites who wanted to work for a wage to be foolish in the extreme. But liberty surely entails the right to be foolish, so long as one doesn't force one's foolishness on others. I believe that the recognition of a right to secession is the single greatest advance toward liberty that is within our grasp. Because many people today acknowledge the right to self-governance, persuading them to acknowledge the right to secession only entails making explicit the logical implication of values that they already hold. Furthermore, the abolition movement offers us an historical precedent for this approach I suggest. Rather than engage in endless disputes amongst themselves, the abolitionists united behind a single simple principle: human slavery is wrong. Similarly, libertarians of whatever stripe today might agree that the bondage of individuals to a state that they had no say in choosing is wrong. Whatever particular laws we advocate, we could unite behind the idea that human freedom is advanced when each person can choose the body of law under which he wishes to live. Each of us, within whatever tradition of morality we endorse, can bring into relief those elements of that tradition that support the freedom of the individual to choose his own form of governance. Libertarians can divide themselves in debating incremental versus radical reform, anarchy versus minarchy, Rand versus Mises, Rothbard versus Friedman, and so on. Or we can choose a common road to travel, one that does not deny or cover up our differences, but still proceeds directly toward eliminating a great evil from the world. I suggest we hit the road. Thank you.